Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome everybody. Happy summer.
Yes.
Happy 4th of July. I hope everybody had a wonderful, safe holiday. There's a lot going on at the chamber and in the community. What we're working on is we've got our legislative series coming up. We're going to really focus on Ellis County this time. We'll have a session on growth and development, and we'll have one on criminal justice and public safety. Y'all hope that you can participate in our legislative series. That happens in August. If you haven't been through the leadership program, Leadership Midlothian, we're currently taking applications for that. Dr. Arnott and Dr. Devaney, who helped get this breakfast started, lead a leadership session. They need to do something on linguistics. They do a leadership session every month. We meet typically on the third Wednesday each month. So we'll kick off on the third Wednesday in August. The date is not coming to me. And we would love to have all of you, if you haven't been through the leadership program, their session is going to make you a better leader. And then the information that you're going to get, because each month has a topic, is going to make you a more informed leader and a more connected leader. So I encourage you, if you haven't been through Leadership Midlothian, let me know, and I'll get you the information. Now, I'm excited to get started on our program today. Todd Linder is our speaker. He has been a licensed professional counselor and supervisor since 1994. He served as executive director of Rafa Christian Counseling for 16 years, and for the past 6 years has served as executive director of Creek Bend Center for Counseling, the counseling ministry started by First Baptist Church here in Midlothian. He has also been an adjunct professor at Dallas Baptist University for 22 years. Todd holds a master's degree in counseling from DBU and a bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry and counseling, also from DBU. Todd worked for 9 years in student ministry before pursuing counseling. Currently, he is pursuing a doctoral degree in counseling, education, and supervision from Texas A&M Commerce, and he says he's getting close to finished. So I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Todd Linder.
Thank you. COVID-19 and the impact that it has is dynamic because it's always changing, and we're trying to figure out where we are today. If we kind of look at the landscape and we sort of check our gut reaction, we would like things to be back to normal, whatever normal looks like, and we would like to move on. And we kind of look around and we say, hey, most things are moving on. We're good. And I think we're good with the exception of the individual people, which in our environment probably means the worker or the employee or the contract laborer. And I think that's where the challenge comes. Because if we were to look at a picture of the landscape today, I think we would say worker shortages, some anxiety, some people are wanting different things than they've wanted in the past. Those are the kinds of things that we're impacted with on a larger scale. So I decided, hey, let's look at the news on a particular day. I took June 29th, that's 8 days ago, and let's look and see, that's a day, every once in a while, media will say, hey, let's do a big thing on COVID and where we are, because maybe it's a slow news day on other political areas. That was one of those days. So I was like, okay, what's the Wall Street Journal, CNN Business, Fox News Business, what are they going to tell us today? So here's some of the things that they're going to tell us 8 days ago. Airlines, restaurants, hotels can't fill open jobs. Many workers that went home when the pandemic hit have not returned. That is probably more of an issue in some other countries than it is in our country, but it's still an issue in major metropolitan areas, Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, so forth, because people did move. They went, when their job ended, they went home, maybe not necessarily to mama going home, but they went somewhere else with relatives or other people, and just tried to ride it out. Well, now they've got to decide, are they going to go back to work in some of those places? And a lot of those folks have said, no, I'm not ready, I'm not interested, I'm not going to do that yet. Others have retired early. There's especially high-risk areas. Lots of police officers retired early. Lots of people that have significant pensions retired early. Lots of teachers retired early. We don't blame any of those groups, right? Because we're like, oh yeah, that's a tough deal, especially during a pandemic. They're skeptical about going back to work in the face of lingering health concerns or having difficulty securing reliable child care, which seems to be a big factor. That whole child care thing is a big factor. So, demand is higher in some sectors and it's lower in others. That is a fascinating thing to me. 9/11 happened, and I remember the RV industry boomed in 9/11 because everybody was going to do things with their family. So what happens this go around? Everything individual, recreationally, was a booming industry. So RVs, boats, ATVs, bicycles, all of those kinds of things. You couldn't buy any of those. They were gone. And people weren't making new ones and prices going up and so forth. Everybody's spending time at home. They're remodeling their house. They're building a new building. They're doing all of those things. Obviously, right, lumber prices, copper prices, drywall prices, all of those kinds of things become a factor. In the United States, a record 4 million people quit their jobs in April, including 649,000 retail workers. So we did a survey of 16,200 employees globally and found that more than half would consider leaving their job after the pandemic if they weren't offered enough flexibility on where and when they work. It's not so much that we're in an overall labor shortage as it's a time of structural changes for the economy. Erica Grosjean, who is that? She was the commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics 2013 to 2017. Things really are moving in lots of ways. And that's sometimes hard to see if your industry is stable or if your particular experience is stable. It's hard to see that that's a big shift, I think, that's happening for us structurally. So, related to the economy, April, 9.3 million job openings, that's a record. Job postings in food preparation and services and I don't know if that just means food preparation and services or if that really means hospitality, and we stuck some hospitality, because that's a hard hit industry also, right? Increased 507% between late July and early June. 507%. I mean, that sounds like housing prices in Midlothian. The pandemic has fostered shifts in the labor market as people reconsider what types of jobs they want to hold on to and on what terms they want to hold on to those jobs. And what are people moving towards? They're moving towards two things. One is flexibility. These may seem like an oxymoron, right? But they're moving towards flexibility, like that quote mentioned on the previous page, and they're moving towards stability. They want a business that's not going to be closed in the next lockdown, or that they're not going to get laid off on in the next pandemic. So people tend to want to move towards those two places, and that's a challenge. Sometimes you can't find those. Maybe that's why it's better to stay home with mama. I don't know. So, what are businesses tending to do today? Well, I think they're trying to move back to normal. They're trying to do business as normal. And I think they're accelerating. So here's two anecdotal, this is my world, right? Two anecdotal examples of that. Dallas Baptist University, where I teach, so I'm an adjunct professor. That's the greatest job in the world because I don't work there. I can teach my class and then I can go home. And that's just awesome. I don't have to deal with all of the other things that my friends say. Hey, you know what's happening here? Yeah, I don't, and I don't care. That is awesome that I don't care. So, as long as I get to teach my classes next semester, that would be nice, you know. But so we have this thing called Institute for Global Engagement. They bring in kind of big name people, and they have an event that exposes those people to the community and student body and so forth, and hopefully it's an educational experience and so on. Well, you know, I think they typically do 2 of those a year. Last year they probably did 9 of those. This year they're doing 2 in September. In September. Now, I don't think that that's a vast conspiracy to load up on all of those things. I do think, though, that it probably has to do with schedules. I bet those people could only come at certain times, so they're doing 2 of them in September. But one of the things that DBU is doing now is they're attempting to say yes to everything that they can to get events at the university to get people on the campus, right? If you have a university, that's what you want to do. You want to get people on the campus, because if you get people on the campus, you'll get students. And it's all about getting students, right? So, okay. And they're pushing on the gas hard to do that. They're saying yes to everything that they can. And we used to have all of these workers in all of these departments doing their job from home and managing whatever services, resources, etc. And now the gas is all the way on the floor, and they're like, whoa, here we go. And DBU even was not hit that hard with enrollment last year. I mean, we were down, but we weren't down what some colleges were. And we've got the largest freshman class. We have the largest freshman class in the history of the university,
That's right.
I think. Yeah, coming in. So, I mean, those are all good news, right, for DBU. But they still got the gas on the floor. They're like, here we go, you know? And so all of the employees, all the contract laborers, they've got to catch up to all of that. Here we go. Okay, how about Children's Medical Center in Dallas? Anecdotal, right? My wife works at Children's Medical Center. She's been there 33 years now. And she's in one of the endocrinology clinics. She's a diabetes nurse educator. And certainly there's people in the hospital and in clinics seeing folks. But there's all kinds of jobs that in COVID-19, everybody figured out you could do from home. Right? You could pull up all that charting information. You could call all those people. You could check all those blood sugars. You could talk to all those sick kids' parents. Create a plan for managing that related to their diabetes, etc., etc. You can do all of that from home. What's children say now? July 1, everybody's back to work every day of the week. Like, oh. And during the middle of the pandemic, what did everybody at Children's say? What a great opportunity for us to try to figure out what jobs have to be done in person and what jobs can be done at home so that we can retain high quality people, because not everybody wants to drive to where Children's in Parkland are just north of downtown, right? And they have nurses and physical therapists and all these kind of people come in that live in Haltom City and certainly down here in Midlothian and in Frisco and in wherever, because it's a high quality place, right? So everybody was excited. Now everybody's not excited anymore, because the feeling is, hey, did we learn anything? No, we didn't learn anything. We're just going to go back to doing what we've always done before. Now, We know that there's probably some problems with that, right? Like, hey, productivity might not be as good at home than when they were at work. And accountability might not be as good at home than when they're at work. And there's probably some challenges. But here's one thing that I don't think we're doing. We're not saying, hey, what are the challenges? I wonder if we can fix those to try to create an environment that works better for the people. I don't know if we're doing that. I think we're saying, hey, let's go back to doing what we've been doing in the past. And while it works for our business, it might not be working for all of the people. Hence all of this data about the worker shortage that's out there. Well, if that's what businesses are doing today, what do we think the workers are doing today? This is where the emotional part comes in, right? So I think that workers have what I would call normal issues related to recovery, which are things like anxiety and depression. Most people come to counseling for something that looks like anxiety or depression, right? They're feeling bad about something. And when I say the word normal, I don't mean to minimize what people are experiencing. I'm just saying it's common. Right? It is common when people go through a traumatic, difficult event to experience all kinds of things that are negative. And so that's still the case sometimes. Grieving. I think people continue to grieve, and they continue to grieve because of losses that they've experienced. Death and change. A lot of people died, right, during COVID. And maybe we move on, but that still impacts us. So one of the things that I do kind of for fun is I lead our security team at First Baptist Church. That's about 20 people. So I kind of look at it like a small business, right? I lead about 20 people, and out of 20 people, one of our guys died from COVID pneumonia. So when we get together for events, and this is like training with SWAT departments, right? We train with Dallas Police Department SWAT, Ellis County, different groups like that. Do we miss Daryl? Daryl's not here anymore. Yeah, we miss Daryl. And that's usually not on the agenda, right? Like, oh, let's talk about how we miss Daryl. But it's still there. And we get together to do our job. But that's a factor. Creek Bend Center for Counseling, I have 8 counselors there, so I put that in the small business category, but people have lost relatives due to COVID pneumonia. Does that impact them when they come to work? Yes, I think it does. Still, even though they died last year sometime, right? How about Midlothian ISD School Board? You think that when the school board hears that Richard Pena is in the hospital with COVID pneumonia, that they don't think about Carl Smith? Yeah, I bet they do. That's not on the agenda either when they get together, but I think that impacts them. I don't know how Richard's doing. I hope he's doing better. I just found out a couple of days ago he was in the hospital. So those are, in the counseling world, we call those triggers, right? Something happens today that impacts something that happened weeks or months or maybe even years ago. And it's a trigger, and we think about that particular kind of event, and then we're grieving again. And grieving doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to sit down on the curb and cry, but it means that this is just hard. It's emotionally painful for me. And we get triggered by all kinds of things. Here's another one. I think this is big, and I don't think that we talk about it very much. Anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief was a theme that I talked about a lot during 2020. And I think it's still there to some degree. And so here's the idea. There's this sense that more loss is still to come. And we don't know what it is. So it's kind of like you combine grief and you combine anxiety. That's just not a fun emotional place to be. Now, the media does not help us with this. I do not like to slam the media. I like the media. No, I take that back. I would like to like the media. You know, I really would. And I think in a free society, a competent, professional, free media is critical to a free society. But what do we get with the media many times? We get the next terrible thing that's going to happen to you. Because that's why we're going to watch the news or we're going to read the whatever. I don't know what it is today because I've been on vacation in Arkansas for a week, which is awesome. I read no news. And I don't watch the news, I read the news because that's better. It's less emotionally challenging for me. But I didn't read any news. But before I left, so 2 weeks ago, the thing that was going to get us was the Delta variant. And I mean, the world was going to come apart because of the Delta variant. Now, there might be something else today, but and you know what? The world might come apart because of the Delta variant. I mean, maybe, or some other variant of COVID-19. It actually might. But I think the media's tendency is to say everything's going to get you. And next week, we'll find the next thing that's going to get you, and we got to make that a big old deal. Because that's what gets people to read or listen. So, anticipatory grief, right? See, the next thing's coming, and here we go. A mourning process can occur even when we sense that a loss is going to happen, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. We know the world around us will never be the same, but what exactly we've lost and will lose is still largely unknown to us. So that came from a 2020 article in Healthline magazine talking about anticipatory grief. And if that's where we are, we carry that around with us while we're trying to do our job. And we're trying to figure out what's that going to be like for me next week, next month, next year. So, where can business be today instead of where we are? Here are things that I think could be valuable. One is to understand our employees and our customers' needs. And the primary way that I do that is that old adage, manage by walking around, right? I really like that. People will ask me sometimes, what are you doing? And I'll say, I'm managing by walking around. Which means I talk to people and I ask them how they're doing. And now, if I'm asking them, first of all, I don't ask how they're doing, right? Because everybody has a tendency to ask that. How are you doing? And if somebody says, how are you doing? Then you know what we say. We say, fine. Because they don't really want to know. Right? They don't really know. So I try to ask people what's going on in their world in a different kind of way. And I want to make sure and not fall into two traps with that. One is asking questions where there's a right answer. Okay? So, I could say to my students in class, I teach this semester, I teach a practicum class in the graduate counseling department, right? And so people are actually out there in the field doing counseling. They come back, we watch their tapes, we're all critical about them. No, we're encouraging to them. You know, it is great. We have tons of fun, right? And so if you're my class, right, I could say something like, you enjoy being in practicum 1, don't you? See, that's really not a question because there's a right answer there. And in order to be honest, if you don't like me or you don't like the class or you don't like the field, but you spent, you know, $50,000 and you don't know what to do now, because it's terrible, you've got to challenge my entire question by saying, no, I don't like the Practicum 1 class. Instead, I could say, what's your experience been like in class? And if I say something like that, positive answers and negative answers are okay. And sometimes I'll say it like this. Hey, tell me what's good about working here during the 2020 pandemic, and tell me what's been bad or hard or difficult about working here during the 2020 pandemic. And I'll ask my employees those kinds of things, because that assumes there's negative. And see, I would like to hear the good, I'm glad about that, but I want to hear the negative. That's where I really grow. And if all I get from people is, I'm good, we're good, you're good, the company's good, all of that, we don't grow, right? Now, you might have a business where it's big enough that you're surveying your employees or things like that, but I think most of us, we're in an environment where we're talking to people. We're not in an environment that's big enough where we're surveying. If we're surveying, we've got to have somebody smart help us write good questions that don't lead us to right answers. Here's the second trap that we fall into. Not assigning a value to what people say. It is very easy, I think, for us to assign a value to what people say. So here's a great example of that, right? I say, hey, what's going to happen this weekend? And you say, oh, my mom's going to come visit. Is that good or is that bad?
It depends.
See, right, it depends. And if I don't know, or if I don't really care, you know what, I could have a tendency to say, oh, that's great, I hope y'all have a good time. Right? But instead, what could I say? I could say, hey, what's that going to be like for you? Because it might be great and it might be terrible. Now, that's kind of a funny one, right? Because we all know, I mean, I don't know, whatever. Yeah, I'm in counseling, so what does that mean? That means all of our problems come from our mom and, you know, all of that stuff, right? Okay, but no, not really, I'm kidding. But there's lots of other things that could happen. Hey, I'm going to be working all this weekend. I don't know if that's good or bad or not. Hey, my wife and I are going to go do these things this weekend. I don't know if that's going to be good or bad. I went to Eureka Springs for our vacation. My wife and I did, right? It was just the two of us, no kids, because our kids are gone. Hallelujah. And we're done with that particular part of our life. And we've been to Eureka Springs before. And there's a lot of good things about it, and there's some things that I don't really like, but I think it's kind of like childbirth, right? You forget about all the things that were not good. And so we say, where should we go? It's been 3 or 4 years since we've been to Eureka Springs. We should go there. Yes. Man, I was so excited. I got there, I was like, oh. Oh yeah, there's these things that irritate me. There's these things I don't like. There's these things that are bad. These things are not a good fit for me. Why are we here? But I've got to be like, okay, hey, we're here, and I can have a good attitude, and we can have fun, and this is going to be good. Or, I can be bitter and angry, and, all of that, right? But is the Eureka Springs a good vacation? People ask me that. They're like, Todd, what was your vacation like? And I have to decide, do they really want to know? Because if they really want to know, I'll tell them what I just told you. And if not, I'll say, oh, it's great, fine. Okay, here we go. So, do we really want to know? And are we going to assign a value to what people say? Because it's so easy to go, oh, Todd, you were on vacation. It must have been good. You weren't working. So let's try to find out where people are really at. The next one is to allow time and room for grieving to happen. And whether that's loss or whether that's change or whatever that is, people have got to catch up. All those folks at Children's Medical Center, they'll come back to work, right? Because they pay them money and it's a good place and they got to drive back to Dallas. Okay. But they're not excited about it. At least the people in my house aren't excited about it. So they've got to get on board, right? And it's tough in a big corporation to get people on board, right? It's like, hey, this is what we're going to do. Let's go. But if you're in a small business, you can work to get people on board. We've got about 30, we've probably got about 50 employees at First Baptist Church, but we've got about 30 employees that, you take off the janitorial folks and the 1099 people and all that other stuff, right? That leaves you with about 30 people. And we have some folks, they're scared of COVID-19. They are scared of COVID-19. They did not want to come back to work. They are not happy when mask mandates went away at FBC Midlothian, all of those kinds of things. They are scared. They have small children. Right now, if I die, I'm sure some people will be sad, but you know what? I'll be all right, really. But if I'm at a different place in life, then it's like, oh, if I die now, this is going to impact all kinds of folks. And that's where some of those people are. And they're having a tough time. And we had to bring them along. We had to bring them along with where we are.
How do you do that?
Well, that one right there. I want to understand what's important to them and what's going on with them. And I want to understand why they're scared, why they're angry. Usually if you're angry, right, it's because you're sad or scared, disappointed, something like that. That's usually underneath anger. So I want to understand those kinds of things. And I want to understand their place in life and what's going on to them. And when they say things like, you know what, I have small kids, we've got a history of immune compromising in our genetics. We've got this and this and this, and this is a tough time for me. I can be like, oh, and I can have compassion for where they are and say, I wonder how we can get from here over to here instead of show up for work on Monday. Monday's our first day back. Come on, get with the program, right? But instead, I can say, hey, and if I've got 10 employees, 20 employees, I'm a whole lot easier to do that. I know I can't do that with 500 employees or whatever, but if I can understand where they are, and if I can bring them along to meet their needs, even their felt needs, right? Let's just say that maybe they're not real needs. Like you look at that and you go, I don't think that's a deal. But you know what? That's a deal to them. So I call that a felt need. Okay, they have a felt need. I wonder if there's things that we can do to meet that felt need that help bring them along. You know those employees at First Baptist Church that had a tough time? They're good now. They're not upset, angry, bitter, leaving, mad, all that stuff. They're not any of that. And I think that's because we did a halfway decent job at bringing them along instead of putting the hammer down and saying, okay, this is what's going to happen. And I think most of the time, those kinds of interactions, those kinds of things happen in the everyday, kind of mundane sort of things. Yes? 5 minutes. So, this quote right here, Trish Warren, Liturgy of the Ordinary. The crucible of our formation is in the monotony of our routines. It's the everyday things. Now, yes, I can have a big meeting with folks and say, hey, we're gonna, have to up our production from 70% back up to 100% because we're ready to do that, or we're going to change the work from home policy, or we're going to this, and this. And here we go. Anybody got any questions, problems? Okay, thank you, goodbye. That's how we could handle that. Or in the everyday, routine, monotonous tasks, we could engage with folks and figure out how they're doing and what's important to them. And I think that's a whole lot more meaningful than that big meeting where we say we're going from 70% production up to 100% production. Because that's followed by this quote here. Everyone wants a revolution. No one wants to do the dishes, right? Yeah. And the dishes, that's where the real work happens. And that's where the real engagement happens with our people. Okay, questions about that? Yes?
Gallup poll does an engagement survey. They've done it for the last 20 years. And they find that not many Americans are engaged. But interestingly, engagement went up during the pandemic compared to before. Fairly significantly, in other words, statistically significantly. And they didn't speculate about why that occurred, but the question I have for you is, why do you think that occurred? People felt better, they were more enthusiastic about doing work during the pandemic than they were prior to the pandemic.
Okay, so I was more enthusiastic about doing work during the pandemic than prior or after, if we could call this after. And I think that's because the landscape did change. Now, it's not because we didn't have to adapt. We had to adapt. Probably half of the clients that I saw, I did virtually, right, in some kind of web cam medium. And I hate that. Just hate that with a passion, right? So it's not like we had to adapt. But I think the landscape changes, and the landscape changes, there's all of these people not working. It's a different environment. I really want stability. I really want connection. I really want meaning. How do a lot of folks get that? Through their work. So if everything's changing, I'm probably going to invest in things that provide stability and meaning and so forth. So maybe that's what happened. I said to myself, not a lot of other folks are working. I had a bunch of people at Creek Bend. They're young, they have children, those kids are out of school, they're at home, they're doing virtual learning. They can't come into the office, right? They did 100% of their sessions on some kind of video format. I still got to come into the office. I was like, this is awesome. Everybody else was stuck at home. And boy, I was excited about going to work.
I wonder if it's the interactions in the office, things that your boss does or your coworkers do that might irritate you, that is now out of the equation, right? Because you're at home and there's only you and you're not as irritating to yourself as other people are. So I'm wondering if that might have had an impact.
I don't know. My speculation is it's sort of like the Hawthorne effect. They all of a sudden people were paying attention to them because they were having them engaged in learning new skills. They were talking to them. There was more exchange. Anyway, that's just my speculation.
That very well could be. Anybody else?
So what do you think is going to be the next normal?
Man,
That's a good question.
I am so bad at predicting the future.
But that's what you're here to do. Speculate.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it all depends on how we respond to the questions on the previous slide. Are we going to connect with the employees and customers, and are we going to adjust to a new normal, whatever that means? And then I think we can have the question about the new normal. Or are we going to try to shove people back into the previous box? I don't know. I think the jury's still out on that.
I think it's gonna be a hybrid box.
It might be.
I think it depends on the industry too.
Yes. Yeah, industries are different on that.
An interesting side note to that, I was talking with a senior person at a major company recently that are going to remain in some part, in large part, virtual. And interestingly, they said that the pool of candidates they had for job openings the quality of those candidates had gone up significantly because they're allowing people to work from home, wherever that home is.
Oh, wow.
So it's interesting that there is some positives coming out of that.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.